chatting vertical like this to let me know that you have a question. So you don't have to keep your hand up for however long. And that can help me sort of keep stack. Thank you, Francis and Yvonne. Everyone can hear. Wonderful. Oh, no technology problems yet. Cool. Okay, everyone is here for Fentanyl Test Strip Train the Trainer. That's really exciting. Thank you so much for being here. I'm really, really thrilled to see this investment and to see folks excited about distributing this tool to community, right? Because this is a really important tool that we can add to our harm reduction toolbox. I'm Christine Rodriguez. I made my own name tag. I manage the Harm Reduction Training Institute that's based here out of the Behavioral Health System, Baltimore, but I work statewide, right? So if we get done, whether you're online or in the room with us, if you end up having any questions, want to do sort of a deeper dive into something, not everything is going to be a matter of training, right? And so I can be a sounding board. We can talk through whatever aspects folks are having challenges with, particularly in your local context, because we know Maryland is super diverse. Every county is dealing with a slightly different thing, even as there are commonalities that we can lean on, right, to provide services to folks who use drugs. All right. This works. Okay. Have we started recording? Wonderful. This webinar is being recorded, and we hope to have the link out after to have it available for the future. So if you onboard new staff, if you have volunteers, etc., hopefully this will be available free of charge as it is, right? All participants in listen-only mode, please all stay in the room so that we can minimize background noise, enter your questions in the chat box. Anything that we don't get to, either in the room, we'll pop on the parking lot, and we'll also keep the transcript of the chat box. Interesting. Sounding muffled. I'll try and avoid that. So that we can address your questions after the fact, if we don't get them answered here. These are a lot of learning objectives, right? Particularly for a 60, 90-minute time together, especially online as a webinar, right? So we're going to be talking about all of these aspects. I can't tell you exactly how to message what you need to message, because I know we have folks here from Baltimore City, from Anne Arundel, from Calvert, from Cecil, right, from all over the place, very different communities, because we know drug use culture and community is also hyper-local, right, so it can look very different in different pockets. But broadly, right, we're going to talk about fentanyl basics, we're going to remind ourselves why we're here, we're going to look at some epi, we're going to talk about test strips, strategies around outreach, messaging, how to read them, right? How to talk about what's useful and helpful. So that's the agenda. Okay. We'll be spending about an hour, maybe a little more with each other online. And then those of us in the room will have an opportunity to sort of practice with test strips and water. So everything should come up negative, which is great. And we can see what that looks like, right? So you can have a feel for what that is before you go talk about them. We'll practice talking about them. Okay. Okay, do you want me to wait? All right, I'm going to keep talking. Dana is working on the sound for folks online, but some of this first we're going to talk about this and remind folks later, but naloxone is absolutely effective with fentanyl overdose. So these are all preventable deaths, right? And so we see Maryland has sort of paralleled what's happened around the country. Around 2013, 2014, we start to see a rise in mortality, right, as fentanyl starts to increasingly enter our drug supply.
And then we see a big sort of shot up in 2016, 2017, when we've really seen fentanyl more broadly to sort of contaminate the drug supply, even in places that we wouldn't necessarily expect, right? So that's 10 years of data, the most recent being 2017. By place, right, you can locate your county on this bar chart, assuming there were overdose deaths. If you're missing from here, that's wonderful. I hope not to see you. And at the far end, Baltimore City, of course, we know that that looks extremely high, in part because there's a proportion of those deaths that represent people who do not live in Baltimore City. They just come to Baltimore City, right? Folks who come to cop drugs, right? Maybe in the city. And this is happening by place of occurrence, right? So the overdose is happening in this jurisdiction where intervention can happen. And so we would expect to see sort of higher numbers in Baltimore. For fentanyl, folks have heard this, the even stronger synthetic opioid, the stronger version, right? I really want to note that this last bar on the far right is total across the state. It's not a spike. It was a little alarming to me at first. That's not a spike. That is just the total across the state in 2017. And still, right, 60 deaths, that's a lot. So we hope to not see this climb. Cocaine-related deaths. The same 2016, 2017 spike that we see here with cocaine mirrors what we saw with fentanyl, right? This is really important to keep an eye on. People who whose drug of choice, right, might be stimulants, or if stimulants are included among several drugs of choice, you're not necessarily expecting an opioid to be inside your cocaine, right? That doesn't necessarily make sense. You may not access syringe exchange. You may not think you need to. You may not be as familiar with naloxone. You may not have any, right? So we want to think about this when we're thinking about outreach. Because the other thing is this doesn't tell us very much, right? It doesn't tell us whether this is, it doesn't tell us whether this is cocaine, whether this is crack, whether this is contaminated stimulant supply, whether people are shooting speedballs. If people are shooting speedballs or otherwise doing sort of mixing drugs, is the opioid, did folks buy a pill, right? Did they think it was a Xanax? Or did folks buy something that they thought was heroin? Does anyone think heroin exists anymore? I know in Baltimore City, everyone assumes it's basically all fentanyl, right? So we don't really know a lot about what's happening. So we talk about, and we'll talk about later, using test strips as a tool of engagement, right? And part of the benefit for us, frankly, as service providers is the quickest information, right, is going to come from the street. The most recent data here is 2017, right? So it's really important that we build relationships with our participants where they trust us enough, right, to tell us what's going on with their drug supplies, what they're seeing, what they're hearing, because you're going to get that information potentially a year in advance, right, of sort of data collection and epidemiology. We can look at trends, and there's limitations with our data. And so similarly, just by place of occurrence, right, we see the same really high numbers in Baltimore City as compared to other places. Some of those folks are not Baltimore City residents, right? Question? What is fentanyl, right? New folks are getting onboarded all the time. Want to make sure we're all on the same page. Fentanyl, we all know is an opioid, can cause overdose, right? It's a synthetic opioid. It's made from chemicals and other molecules in a lab, synthesized, if you will, right, in a lab. Heroin is naturally derived from the poppy plant, right? And so illicitly manufactured fentanyl, right, because we have used it in medical settings for a very long time, right, since the 60s, and then a big spike in use medically when we got the patch formulation in the 90s, right? But these fentanyls, these fentanyl analogs, these are being manufactured in labs, right? Very potent. We've heard over and over how much stronger fentanyl is than morphine, than heroin, right? Certainly in terms of pain relief. What's really scary, though, about fentanyl is not necessarily that it's stronger. It's this, what is called high lipid solubility, right? Which means it dissolves in like fats and other oils and things like that, and can cross our blood-brain barrier that much faster. So it hits quick, and the effects end quicker than, say, heroin, right? Certainly quicker than carfentanil, those sorts of things. And so it's the rapid onset that's really what is new, really what's scary. Because with heroin, certainly there were overdoses, certainly overdose deaths. And without the rapid onset, an overdose could take hours to happen on heroin, and it creates a wider window of opportunity for intervention, especially with naloxone. With fentanyl, that's not the case, and people fall out really fast, right? And so rescue breathing is really important because that's how you die from overdose. You slowly stop breathing until you just stop, right, from opioid overdose. And so it's really that quickness that makes people nervous, that makes this alarming, right? There's not enough time to intervene. It's an opioid, so the biological effects are similar, right, to all our other opioids. Euphoria, right, pain relief, sedation. The respiratory depression is what we're worried about with overdose. Why test? I would like to think that everyone has their own reasons for why test. Not all of your participants or folks on outreach are going to see the value immediately, and some people might be clamoring for them, right? It kind of depends where you live, what's been in the news, what the word on the street is. Like, do people know that these exist? In the city now, absolutely. People are asking for them, right? And so we have to understand the reasons that people might want to test, so that sometimes we can help explain to folks, well, this is what other people have found beneficial. Does that sound like something that might work for you? Is that something you're interested in? Naloxone is effective to reverse fentanyl overdoses. There are often stories in the media, stories primarily coming out of sort of EMS, sometimes response, law enforcement response, and there is a mythology that fentanyl is so powerful that you can look at it and overdose, that you can touch it and overdose, that naloxone is not effective. None of that is true. Okay? And it's important for us to know that because it's important that those mythologies don't get ingrained in our communities. We don't want people thinking that this can't be reversed by naloxone, because then they won't want the life-saving drugs that could save lives, right? So we're still going to use standard steps. We are going to call 911 if that's safe. Hit people with that first dose of naloxone, right? We want to learn rescue breathing and learn how to teach rescue breathing to participants who have the time to hang out, right? Wait a couple minutes. It's going to feel like a long few minutes, right? You can let people know that. A lot of times when people have needed many doses, it's not that many doses were needed necessarily, it's just many doses were used. Hitting people with naloxone faster, unfortunately, doesn't make it work faster. It takes the 2 minutes, right? So someone could have been given 3 doses in 3 minutes, right? It doesn't mean they necessarily needed it. And we want to be vigilant. Rescue breathing, super important. My partner also does this work, and he recently gave me an extremely good training tip, right? So when you're doing rescue breathing, it's to the beat of the Bee Gees, Staying Alive. Right. If you're trying to remember, so the ha, 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 ha is the weight, and each breath, staying alive, 1 second, staying alive, 1 second, and then you back off. Because if you do it too fast, you will make yourself pass out, right? And then, you know, care for the person after insofar as they're interested in your care, right? If folks have to absolutely leave for some reason, we want to remind folks to put people in the recovery position, keep their airway open, right? If they have to take off. Knowledge is power, right? We understand this in so many different ways. And people who use drugs feel the same way and want knowledge and want information to be able to protect each other and themselves, right? So what are the benefits? Obviously, confirm whether there's fentanyl in drugs, right? It's important to remember for folks that this is a qualitative test, not a quantitative test. So it tells us yes, no. It doesn't tell us how much. And we'll talk about this later, it's a very sensitive test, right? So it can pick up very, very small amounts. There's a question among some folks out west who've tested methamphetamine. It's positive for fentanyl, but users haven't felt any different effects. And so is it that there was cross-contamination of drugs? Because it wasn't enough to make anyone overdose, certainly. Is it that we're still learning about the tests and it was a false positive? Because methamphetamine is a little different than testing other things, right? So whether people are actively interested in fentanyl, it's important to know if you have it, whether you want it or not. And then you can make decisions based on that. There are some folks, especially if you're seeing younger folks, if you're seeing younger drug users, there is a possibility, you have to ask, right, when they started using, that all they know is post-fentanyl landscape, right? So what they want is potentially going to look different. Their tolerance may look different, right? Some people are sad that there's not just regular heroin, right? Not everyone likes fentanyl. And you might see a generational split there. If you've never had just heroin, then you wouldn't know necessarily, right? Confirm whether it's present or absent in just any street drug, because we're seeing it pop up everywhere, right, in all drugs, in different places in the country, right? So there are certainly anecdotal reports, at minimum, right, of fentanyl in the cocaine, fentanyl in the crack, right? Absolutely. Fentanyl in benzos, and benzodiazepines present an extra overdose risk for people taking opioids anyway, if folks are mixing, right? So it's really important to know. Because if I'm smoking crack, and that's been my drug of choice, especially for many, many years, I'm not thinking I need naloxone. It's not effective. It's not the point, right? But if there's an opioid in my system, I'm going to have even less tolerance built up, right? Because it's not what I take. Understand your source, especially if you have a regular one, right? Not all people who sell know the amount of fentanyl in the drugs that have come down from them to sell, right? The majority of sellers are not huge trafficking organizations, right? And so even if you ask your source, they may not necessarily know the accurate answer, right? And it creates an opportunity, right, for options, for safety, and for choice. And our folks are folks who often don't have choice, right? Services are coercive, incarceration is always a risk, you might have your kids snatched away if you access a service, right? And so creating choice is really important, right? Autonomous choice. And there are options. And options always exist, and that's my favorite thing about harm reduction, is we take this very stepwise sort of spectrum approach to what the options are, right? So I guess I would probably actually start at the bottom. I would say do not use. Important message, always an option. I would not lead with that with your folks. By and large, people are still going to use. And the trust and the rapport it can create when that's not the first message that comes out of folks' mouths, can matter. It doesn't have to not be there, right? But maybe don't lead with it, right? Can you get your drugs from a different place that might be safer? Is there anyone that you can get actual prescription pills from and not buy from the street? Is there any, I mean, this is a matter of privilege, right? But this is going to be a hard one too when fentanyl is seen in so many places. A different source may not be either viable or it may not help, right? Always have naloxone, make sure folks know how to use it. It's getting really cool now. A lot of these packages already have their own instructions inserted. So if people just happen upon you, chances are folks could open it up. Nasal spray is pretty intuitive how to use it, but tell others how to use it. I am not an injection drug user. I have naloxone in my bathroom. I have naloxone in my purse. I always have naloxone when I travel. Right? You just never know. And you don't have to be injecting to overdose on opioids, right? Try not to use alone. And we want to say try, right? Because some folks have no people, right? No family, no community. Some folks want to use alone and just will, right? So we want to encourage folks, and what are their options if they only can use alone? Can they at least use it in a room where the door does not open in? So if they overdose and slump against the door, no one has to break it open, or no one is barred from entering, right? Can you, right, tell someone? Sometimes that's all it takes. I've had people pull me aside, Christine, right? Show me I'm planning on doing this today. I just wanted to let you know. If you don't mind checking in on me later. Shoot her a quick text, no big deal, right? Make sure folks are okay, right? Checking in. Use with or near folks who do have naloxone, right? If you don't have folks to use with and you don't have a home, can you use somewhere semi-public where someone might find you if you overdose, right? We want to give people creative strategies that are pragmatic, that work for their lives. And not all of those strategies are going to be the strategies that we would want them to choose or prioritize, right? And something's better than nothing. Another strategy, if folks are in a group, people are saying if you can try and stagger your use, right? So only one of you or a couple of you uses at a time so folks can see how it hits. And if you overdose, someone's there, right? Realistically, if folks are in withdrawal, that's not a pragmatic option. But you can always let folks know because they have the knowledge and then they can use it whenever it makes sense. You don't withhold the knowledge just because people may not take it, right? You give it, and sometimes, I know it happens to me all the time, someone's voice will pop in my head. I'm like, oh yeah, there's that one advice I got from Megan. Maybe I'll try that this time, right? And Baltimore City, Be More Power here has worked on a public education campaign called Go Slow, right? So use a little more slowly. They're saying about, if you're injecting, maybe 20 seconds. That can be a long time, right, when you're just sitting there. Just like 2 minutes waiting for naloxone to work. When you're feeling ill, you know, all you're trying to do is feel well. I have to wait, right, and talk people through it. Do that tester shot, right? See how it feels. You can always do more drugs, right? Really hard to take drugs out of your body once you've done them. So that's the rationale for folks, right? Questions? Is there any questions in the chat box? So I want to pause here for a second. So fentanyl test strips, there's been great research behind them already, which is amazing because people have only just started using this intervention in the last maybe year and a half. But research demonstrates over and over that when people have access to drug testing like this, they by and large do make some different decisions, right? You don't have to guess or assume, you know, and you can act accordingly, right? And that's important. Just like syringe exchange is extremely effective as HIV prevention. And that's important. And this is a way that we engage with our people. These are amazing, amazing outreach tools for people who use drugs actively, right? I was scrolling Facebook last night, being anxious about today's training, and someone had posted a quote that someone I very much admire in our movement had put up last month, and it really resonated with me for this training, right? He said opponents of syringe services programs and harm reduction in general typically remark that it, quote, unquote, sends the wrong message, right? The message that they're referring to is, we love you, and we want you to be safe, right? And so that's the spirit that that harm reduction comes to with fentanyl test strips. This is an opportunity to show people that we care about them. This test strip, in and of itself, is not going to get you housed, get you into treatment, get you mental health care, right? But it demonstrates that we care, and that may be the only caring message that person hears all year, all day, all week. The only kind word, the only eye contact, the only smile that person experiences, right? And so this is really powerful, because what actually makes harm reduction work isn't the exchange of syringes, right? Because I can go sit in front of the building today with a table full of, you know, syringes and works, and no one's going to come talk to me necessarily, right? This is about building relationships. Harm reduction works because you're building relationships of trust, of respect, of compassion. And what that serves to do is re-engage people with systems. We can be the first touch point into systems that have been very abusive and very traumatizing. And we can show folks that it doesn't have to be that way, and there are people who care, right, and who want to provide services. So when you're doing outreach, right, scare tactics, not helpful, never have been, right? I think about all the health behavior messaging I got when I was a teenager. I grew up in Arizona, all scare tactics, right? They did not help, by and large. Accurate, practical information is helpful, right? Think about what you want as a consumer of anything that you're going to spend your money on, right? Those resources are valuable. You want accurate information so you can make your own choice, right? I don't want to hear all these crazy things about these refrigerators and like how they might explode because one exploded once in a decade ago. Like, just give me the information about the fridges so I can buy a refrigerator that works for me. And then leave me alone, is how I often feel, right? So give people the information they need. Message universal precaution. This has already happened in the city, depending on how educated folks are, how experienced they are with the drug supply locally, right? Because we know we're on a major corridor, we've got folks coming through. Universal precaution, just always assume it's present, even in your stimulants, right? Just better safe. The worst thing is you're a little more safe. Prioritize naloxone distribution to people most at risk of overdose and the people who are most likely to be with them. So people who actively use drugs, particularly people who ingest, right? Their peers, their loved ones. The vast, vast, vast majority of overdoses are reversed by other people who use drugs, right? And so we want to saturate the community, that specific community. And that's when you're going to start to see, right, numbers at a community level. Because the evidence that we have around community level overdose drop, right, is based on exclusively, right, flooding drug-using communities with naloxone. Again, when we think about outreach, folks, if you're not seeing stimulant users, what you're not seeing, it doesn't mean it's not there, right? And so to continually think about, okay, well, I know this cocaine thing is happening. I see the data in my county. There's like, it's here, it's happening, right? How do I find them? Who are these folks? Who have I not been seeing? Who can I talk to figure out where they might hang out and how I can message services in a way that makes sense, right? So folks who use stimulants, benzos, et cetera, folks need information, folks need test strips, and absolutely folks need naloxone. It's a little bit of a false split, right? Opioid users and not. Sort of how we address folks' health, disease by disease, right? We have HIV, we have cancer prevention, we have all these things that can live inside the same bodies, right? And so law enforcement has a sort of drug-by-drug approach. They're following a product, so that makes a lot of sense. A lot of those products end up in the same bodies all at the same time, just like health conditions, right? Mixing drugs is extremely, extremely common. So when people first talk about opioid users or stimulant users, like there are some general like characteristics, there are some commonalities. And talk to your folks, because your opioid users might be your cocaine users, right? And you can ask them about what's going on. You know, how can we keep folks safe? What do folks need? What you're doing right now, cool, getting test strips, exciting. We don't want to make access to strips contingent on accessing another service. Just like syringe services, just like food pantries, just like clothing closet, right? So we have to be really self-reflective and really mindful of our policies, right? Of our procedures, of how we message things, right? Because what we perceive to be an incentive, other folks may perceive to be coercive, particularly among folks who are always coerced, right? Well, you don't have to go to jail, but you're going somewhere, right? You're going to jail or you're going to treatment. I like to keep people out of jail, and that doesn't feel like a choice. And so we want to think critically, right, about how we set up those services. And chances are, if folks are part of your neighborhood, part of your community, and not moving through, right, they're going to learn they can trust you, and we'll come back. Again, naloxone, 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 rescue breathing, super important. Of course, tell people to call 911, right? EMS becomes much more important with the rapid onset of fentanyl. Remind folks to report that someone is not breathing, someone is unresponsive. Make sure EMS comes out, right? And make sure folks understand the Good Samaritan law and its limitations. Calling 911 is not always going to be safe for people. And while that may be hard to understand and we may disagree with it, it's something that we have to acknowledge and understand is true. And if we can't at least acknowledge people's reality, we're going to lose rapport. We're going to lose the ability for them to trust us, right? A lot of the same things that we've been talking about throughout, right? So I'm going to highlight the first and last point. Fentanyl is different than heroin, right? So test strips, when things are confirmed present or confirmed absent, and people are still going to use anyway, knowing that it's present or absent can help them understand, as they use different drugs, use different sources, or what have you, right? How to recognize that there's fentanyl. How to anticipate fentanyl. Whether the taste is different, whether it's a different color, a different texture, a different body sensation entirely, right? the more people know about those things, right, the more they can stay safe. Kind of like being able to recognize when alcohol is in your drink, right? Because we don't want folks accidentally, right, or being assaulted, right? If someone pours booze in your non-boozy drink, you want to know, right? So that you can keep yourself safe. Connected local harm reduction services. That is increasingly possible. We have a number of folks who are managing syringe services programs, new ones in this room. I know there's some folks online. This is huge. You may not have syringe exchange in your county, but there are counties that do. They may still be too far, too hard to get to, but you can let folks know they're there. What if there's that one day they have a ride and can make it, right? So connect folks. They'll have information, they'll have the extra supplies maybe you can't get, maybe it's not, doesn't really fit within what your broader organization does, right? Like build those partnerships. Harm reductionists love partnerships, right? Use lower risk routes. That's not always something we're great about in this country. I feel like other places are a little better about routes of administration. So if folks are injecting, is there any opportunity, any chance that they might switch to smoking? It's unlikely, but you never know. Is there a time of day that they can smoke or swallow their drugs versus inject? That's that many fewer chances, right, to acquire Hep C, to have fentanyl hit really hard and fast, and overdose very fast, right? There was a program in a country I cannot remember in Europe that had glycerin pills that they got from their local health food store. If you can, if you're interested, here are some capsules to make your own pills and swallow your drugs if you don't want to inject, right? We give people options. They're not always going to take them. So learning about the different routes of administration, safer ingesting techniques, these help us give people options. Cool. Question. Information about Maryland's Good Samaritan law will be on this slide. It's a little small in the room. You cannot be arrested, charged, or prosecuted for possession of a controlled dangerous substance, possession or use of drug paraphernalia, providing alcohol to minors. Calling will not affect your parole or probation status. I wrote down for myself the extra small print. I don't know if I need a new glasses or not. The extra small print, Maryland's law does not protect against arrest for open warrants, right? And crimes not listed above. Crimes not listed above are like a lot of crimes, right? A lot of crimes, right? Are the folks that you see who use drugs trading sex? I don't see that listed. And let's remember that men trade sex, right? So it's important to keep these things in mind. Do folks have warrants out for their arrest? Do they even know if they have warrants out for their arrest, right? These are just things to talk through so people understand what risks they're actually taking, whether it's the risk around drug use or the risk around engaging with our system. Oh, Patrick. Accuracy. They are accurate, very accurate. So some of this research was done right here in our backyard by Susan Sherman's team at Johns Hopkins. Thank you for your work if y'all are online. Also in Rhode Island, right? And what they found is that it detects very, 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 very small amounts, right? Of course, fentanyl we know is potent, right? The doses that are generally given medically are in micrograms. And so this is picking up 0.13, right, of a microgram in a milliliter. So it's picking up, right, a lot. It can tell you if fentanyl is present or not. But it's so sensitive that sometimes it may just have been cross-contamination. Because this is sensitive and fentanyl is strong, right? That if the drugs that you have acquired were at one point packaged on the same table as fentanyl or weighed on the same scale, it might test positive, right? So unfortunately, we can't tell people, like, it's positive if it's 99%, it's positive if it's 1%, right? So this is where the uncertainty lies. The lovely fact sheet that this study has tells us that these percentages mean that about 1 in 50 tests will come back false positive, about the same 1 in 50 false negative. Imperfect science, but a really cool tool. Limitation. It's important that folks understand that too, right? So that we're not overselling anything. Overdose can happen still for all sorts of reasons. And so we may want a safety plan with folks, right? And get really creative about what that means. And we want to revisit our original trainings on overdose and the risk factors that really put people at risk for fatality, right? Mixing drugs, especially benzos. Especially benzos, right? Ask people about those. In other cases where people have taken dose after dose after dose of Narcan to come out, it's because they were on benzos as well. The naloxone works on the opioids, not the benzodiazepines. So, you know, that part of it, right? The naloxone's working, and the benzos are going to make you super sluggish, super out of it, slower to come back. And that can be really scary. Remember to tell folks, if you're having these conversations, right? If you're mixing drugs, if possible, try to do the opioid first. Okay? We don't necessarily think order matters and think it's a matter of preference or irrelevant. Do the opioid first if possible. You can see how hard that hits first and decide what you want to do next. Particularly if your other drugs that you're deciding to take are, say, maybe cocaine, and maybe you get really excited, really euphoric when you take that cocaine and decide you want to do a little more opioids than you'd originally planned on, right? So we want to encourage people, right, to try and do this first. Reduce risk of overdose. Using alone, of course, we talked about safety plan if folks have to, right? Reduce tolerance if you're seeing folks recently released, right, from jail, from detox, from residential, what have you, especially from incarceration. Folks are at such extremely high risk of fatal overdose at that point. And remember that reduced tolerance happens really fast, right? You can have a cold for a weekend and not have the same tolerance from before, right? So if folks are sick, right, if their physical health is deteriorated a little bit, compromised immune systems, those sorts of things, right? Mental health, this is a big topic. This is a SHUN training, right? Talk to people, right? Talk to folks about why it helps with their mental health, right? Because by and large, that's likely what's happening. People are either managing symptoms or managing experiences, right? An unknown product. This is a hard one. This is a hard one because we don't really have anywhere to tell people to go that has safer products, right? Evolving, right? Iterative, imperfect science. These strips are designed to be used on urine. They're just drug tests for, you know, folks' urine. And harm reductionists, once they saw what was happening with overdose and started to understand that it was fentanyl, started using these strips off-label and found them really effective, if imperfect, right? And very cheap. And that's exciting, right? We have been upon some cheap interventions, and it's nice. And so we are still learning, right? And that's another reason it's really important to talk to your folks, to add to the knowledge base around the country of what's going on and how we intervene effectively. There are potentially going to be fentanyl analogs that have been diluted, and this is really more of a concern if you're testing methamphetamine or MDMA, because you need to use much more water, right? And so does that dilute some fentanyl analogs? I don't know. Some potential for false positives and false negatives, right? False positives, probably fine. Worst thing is maybe we were a little safer than we would have been otherwise, and there was no fentanyl in there after all. And undetected or emerging fentanyl analogs. These are made in the lab, right? And so every tweak of a molecule can technically, right, if you create a different compound, a different substance entirely, it makes it hard for law enforcement to catch up, right? And so new analogs are being produced, right? But this is the analog list, about a dozen that the test strips catch, that they pick up. Carfentanyl's on that list, along with about, a dozen others. How to use them. You'll get these slides, so if it's a little small, I apologize, right? Once we're offline and we can make a little more noise in the room, we'll practice and pop some of these open. But you'll want to test residue, right? All you need is residue because the test is sensitive that way, right? It is accurate. Okay. So you want to have a sterile container, prepare your drugs. You want to load your shot and your syringe first, right? And there's some residue in there, residue remaining. Add a little water, stir it. How much water? I put a few measurements. Everyone's brains work a little differently. I've seen a milliliter, about a teaspoon. If you have a sterile container, as is pictured, a 1/4 inch. If you are giving out those sterile, the sterile water tubes that look like that, about 10 drops. Whatever makes sense in terms of telling people how much, right? We're not going to have measuring spoons, right? So we're going to eyeball it. Okay. Now you see on the right, the ideal is you have a sterile container, because otherwise you may be picking up fentanyl that was in previous batches of your drug. And if you have powder, you can also test in your baggie if that's more convenient, right? You can pour out the powder and test with just the residue. Add the water and mix well. With pills, you're going to want to tell folks as much as possible, right, to really, really grind and crush their pills really, really, really well, as fine as possible, and mix it around, right? What we've come to know is that because there are so many pressed pills, fake pills being sold on the street, right, Xanax, Percocet, Oxys, right, like all of that stuff, pressed pill makers, presses, are very cheap, considering, right, and you can buy them online. And so when fentanyl is pressed into a pill, it tends to stick to itself. And so it does the same effect that they call it, I think they actually do call it chocolate chipping, right, is what I've seen. And so fentanyl in your pill looks like more of a chocolate chip cookie, right? You can get that bite that has 80% of the chocolate of your cookie, and you can have that bite of cookie that has no chocolate in it, right? That horrible, horrible bite. Where you were like, why didn't they mix it dough? Because I'm just not eating the rest of this cookie. It's disgusting. I want my chocolate, right? So it is unevenly distributed. In an ideal world, you'd probably test every single shot, right? Every hit you take, you would test. And in reality, right? So if folks are really interested and want strips, please give them. Please give them away. All right. Questions about any of this? So you dip the end, you hold the blue end, you dip the end with little squiggly lines that look like water into the water. Not past that, oh, I have this thing. Not past this, like little blue line. Right, about 15 seconds. They say lay it on a sterile surface. For a lot of folks, it's going to be the top of this sterile container, right? That would be better than just a surface that hasn't been cleaned. Wait 2 minutes. People see results in as quickly as 1 minute. It can be more accurate after 5, certainly what we've heard from Hopkins staff. Though the only risk here is a false positive, right? Because one line, we'll get to this, right? One line is positive, sort of the opposite of pregnancy tests for anyone with that experience. One line positive for fentanyl, 2 lines negative for fentanyl, right? So today when we test, we should all of us see that second line, right? So wait about 2 minutes. So I have heard around the state that methamphetamine is making a comeback. I have heard in the city that there are just particular pockets of community that use meth. Meth is here, even if it's not the drug of choice, right? With methamphetamine and MDMA, much more popular in some communities out west, what folks out there found is that something about the composition of these drugs, the chemistry of these drugs, might trigger a false positive if the concentration is too high for some reason. And so what they have found is the best way to get an accurate result is instead of that really tiny little drip drop of water is to use about a half a cup and only test residue so that it can be in a low enough concentration, right, that you can get a more accurate result. That'll be true of MDMA too. So if you have some club scenes, right, if you have some rave scenes, if you have, right, there are different pockets of folks who really enjoy MDMA, and they're not necessarily the same people as, you know, the folks who are injecting dope, right? And then you'll have your results, right? 1 line is positive, 2 is negative. That second line is often really faint, usually just kind of a pink. No lines, or not that first line. No control line, not valid. Right? And you can just test again. Okay. This is another diagram of this from DanceSafe. This nonprofit harm reduction organization has a DC chapter that is really the DC Baltimore corridor all the things chapter, right? So if you do end up finding that you have some communities you want to serve, right, that are using club drugs, right, ecstasy, etc., they have amazing materials and a lot of really good supplies, right? So don't insert above that line. There's the test area. 1 positive, 2 negative. Right? This is what will be available, I believe, for download online. I'm getting a probably head from MDH. I believe they are about a half page. Not yet? Okay, cool. So these are handouts that you can include in your packet, however you're packaging all of your materials. You can adapt this if needed, right? But this is a great resource that will be available just for free to print. And it's handy to have these included on Outreach in case we forget, and we can just pull them out and pretend like we're walking folks through instructions as a training tool. And we can remind ourselves how to use them that way, right? Question?
we going to get into specific forms of drugs like rock and tar, all that?
I would call me.
Okay. I would call me.
Because everyone's seeing such different things, I would like to probably have that conversation with you. Although my understanding is that like tar is not as common or popular out here.
Not, but just trying to think about like what we're going to do with crystal and things that aren't diluted as well.
Yeah, so with tar, I feel like folks have seen less of a problem on the West Coast with fentanyl because of tar, because it's so gooey that like it's really hard to like distribute powder through the goo. With the rest, it feels like a kind of a wait and see, which sucks. I mean, that's a terrible answer. And
there's nothing you can like pop a rock on top of a strip and.
If only.
Okay.
If only. There is the Chicago Recovery Alliance in Chicago, Illinois has at long last acquired a mass spectrometer for their syringe exchange drop-in center. And they are testing folks' drugs on site, and and so it's like a very, very sort of high-level analysis that the machine spits out a page of all the things that are in there. It is unbelievable.
What was that again?
Chicago, Illinois.
No,
The what?
the organization.
Chicago Recovery Alliance. They are phenomenal. But yeah, until then, I think it's really just trying to educate folks and yeah. Did I see someone over here?
No, to answer the question, I didn't know if I heard it.
Yes, right?
If we will.
Slides are going out? Yes, people will get the slides. Yes.
For people who don't want to crush the pills, is there enough residue like in the baggies, or do they have to crush the pill in order to test for it?
They have to crush the pill in order to test for it. If they don't, it's a toss-up,
Okay.
right, because of the adhering to itself thing.
Right.
I mean, the other thing that you can do, it's not going to be an option for everyone that folks want to do, but if you do, if you are willing to crush your drugs, you can always, what's the term for this? You can always parachute them, right? So you can still swallow them, but you put the powder inside like a tissue, right? And you swallow the whole thing that way, which doesn't sound pleasant. But if you want to test your drugs and like if the scales balance that way for you, then it might be worth it. Yeah, alternative routes of administration are hard for folks. Yeah, I would suggest parachuting. I'd always suggest the things and let people decide if they want to do them or not. You know, we were having a conversation not that long ago, maybe you were there, about booty bumping. And like, no, not everyone is going to want to do that instead of injecting. Maybe very few people want to do that instead of injecting, but like, you let them know that it's an option, and who knows? Yes.
Well, with that, I was thinking, I'm sorry.
No, yes, and then I'm seeing you.
Okay. Like a blank capsule, they could, instead of parachuting, they could put it in a regular, just a capsule.
A regular capsule, like a person. Like I said earlier, right? They're all over the health food stores, right? It's something that some programs could buy. I can't speak for what you can do with your funding or any of that, but it's something I've seen programs buy. Absolutely. You're a pill and a new pill. Exactly. Perfect.
Or even, yeah, vitamins that you could pop open and then just reuse that capsule.
Totally.
For kids. Like I have a daughter who doesn't swallow pills well, so we bust it open and there's just empty capsules.
Thank you, Mom. Exactly. Creative, right? We get creative with getting our kids to take things, right? Finding ways to make it work. I love that. Because we want to find ways to make it work, not excuses, right? We don't want to narrow folks' options. We want to broaden them, right? Even if they're not perfect ones.
So do they need the whole pill to test it, and then they just cut off a portion of the pill and test that?
So they could, and it runs the same cookie risk that like I lopped off the half of the cookie that didn't have any chocolate chips in it, and I tested that, and it was negative for chocolate.
Right.
And then I tasted the other half of the cookie, and there's like all sorts of chocolate in there. So yes, and, right? So I wouldn't discourage folks from testing that way, but I would just let them know, right? And if that's how they want to test, that's how they're going to test, that's how they're going to test, right? Yes?
I have a question about the sterile container.
Yes.
Does it really need to be sterile, like no bacteria? I think it needs to be clean.
Ah, that's a great question.
Sterile is not the right word.
Totally. I do mean sterile. So ideally, everyone has sterile injection equipment. I also say sterile because I don't take it. Clean has been loaded with a lot of stigma, particularly when we're talking about people or tests, right? Like that someone popped like a dirty urine or a clean urine, right? And so when we talk about clean supplies versus dirty supplies, it's sometimes really difficult for folks to conceive of that way of framing things, because for something to be clean, something has to be dirty. But my point, right? There are a lot of other very important reasons that you want a sterile container, regardless of testing for drugs. So to prevent bacterial infections like endocarditis, soft tissue infections, abscesses, all of those things.
I was thinking for population that
Yeah.
I'll be working with.
Yeah.
I don't think that our kids are going to have a sterile,
Yeah.
or if they're doing things like cocaine or the Percocet, pills that aren't Percocet. So
Yeah.
the ones that aren't injecting,
Mm-hmm.
I don't think they're going to have a sterile
Totally.
container once we give them a sterile container,
Yeah.
when we give them the fentanyl test strip.
Yeah.
So are there little tiny sterile little dishes that we're going to be getting with the fentanyl strip? Because I don't know.
Little tiny sterile dishes do exist. For now, I would say that has to be purchased with alternative funding, and/or I would make friends with your local syringe exchange. Even if you don't have folks who inject, that's not to say that they're not going to have supplies that could be really valuable. And so this is really, we're talking about, this is the ideal to shoot for, sterile every time. Pragmatic, realistic, of course, that's not going to be feasible, right? But we want to tell people what's ideal and why, right? It's not just because I'm being annoying or want to like give you another task to do or mother you. It's because you might get an abscess, right? It's like you might get a false result, right?
Okay, so where
Total access to total access to safety work.
I need you to write me. So I would ask your syringe services coordinators what they've found most useful in terms of ordering, most cost effective. And, you know, if folks have like the bottle cap off their water bottle or their Gatorade or something, rip that out, there's something, right? So you can look for, like, you can share with people like some ways that they can sort of DIY their own.
Is bleach or alcohol an option? That they could
To
sanitize
something?
and...
Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, I think that's, that can't hurt, especially if we're talking like Hep C prevention. Is it enough? I don't know. I don't know if we know. Yeah. I'd be really interested to hear, though, what y'all end up finding, because what I'm saying is this is all very new, right? So you can really contribute to our understanding of how things work and how people are experiencing them out here in Maryland.
I have a similar question around like sterile supplies. So because we're a syringe services program, we'll give out, you know, sterile cookers and sterile water. does the water have to be sterile? Or I've read that there are some other options when you're doing the test, that you could, tap water, bottled water.
Tap water, bottled water, yeah.
Okay.
And especially sort of, I mean, everything's sort of better if it's sterile for everybody, but that's also, I think, a function of like harm reduction spreading more, and particularly in more clinical settings. So we're using more medical language when tap water's fine, use a bottle cap if you can't, like, we make it work. But yeah, you're right, like sterile water's great if you're giving it out, they have it. And tap would be better than like from a natural, an alley, a puddle, right? And we know that folks who are really marginalized, who are often experiencing homelessness, right, that's the access to the water they have, right?
Do we know of any other contaminants besides the methamphetamine that will screw up the test entirely?
I've asked, and to the knowledge that I know, MDMA and meth, that's it. I asked specifically about cocaine, since that's what we're seeing here, and it's not about that it's a stimulant versus it's something about the chemical, like molecular makeup. Scientists that are more science than me, I think, understand this. Yes.
Is there any reason that people should not use then the drug residue that they've tested? Like, once the test has been dipped into it, is that?
I don't think,
Okay.
yeah. Right. Yeah.
If it's enough.
So, and that's another reason
It may not be enough.
I'm thinking about,
like another reason for having sterile supplies, because if you were gonna then use the residue that's been in whatever container or has whatever water, then we would want to err on the side of sterile everything as much as possible.
and people would feel better that things, it just wouldn't feel like you're wasting something, even if you didn't get anything out of it.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So this is like one of many supplies, one of many like tools to pop in a toolkit that we use, right, in harm reduction and outreach. And it's also true that I think a lot of the testing work where we know anything about this, that's happening through syringe services, right? It's a really effective way to get to the people you need to get to, right? Fentanyl test strips are different. They're like syringe services. You cannot deliver the intervention without encountering and building with people who use drugs. Naloxone is a bystander intervention, so ideally you're getting it to people who use drugs, but you don't have to, right? I don't have to use drugs to save someone's life. But test strips are useless to people who do not use drugs, right? So we're going to want to really keep that targeted, and syringe exchange is just a sort of natural resource, right, that people who inject want to access. And there are all those sort of ambient supplies, so easier to sort of one-stop shop it. But we can also, I think, make sure to send out like a little list of counties who are now up and running. Very exciting.
I have a two-part question.
Yes.
So do the strips lose their validity over time? Like, do they have an expiration date?
They do have an expiration date. These say till 2020.
It's about 2 years.
Say about 2 years.
Okay.
I would, I can ask around about effectiveness after expiration, and it's going to be, I think, very unlikely that I know anyone who's let one expire.
Okay. And then also, do they need to be kept at a specific temperature, kind of like how naloxone needed to be?
Not that I know of.
Okay.
It does have its like store at temperature.
Mhm.
But that's 35 to 86.
Okay.
So just in the really winter months, right, or like maybe the very summer months.
And can you also?
And, right. We don't know yet, so that's
Okay.
an interesting question.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
I can ask around.
Sure.
I'll ask around certainly about the weather. I don't think I'm going to know anyone that knows anyone that let a strip expire. I think people are more clamoring for them, so I don't think that's a thing quite yet. But other questions? Yes. Thank you.
You have lots of online questions, so whenever everyone in the room is done asking questions.
Let's get to them. Yes, please. I think while we go through these online questions, we have to click back into the PowerPoint. What's happening? Do you want to just read it out? Do that.
If you use too much water, will it invalidate the test?
If you use too much water, will it invalidate the test? Yeah, so that's the concern that we were talking about earlier with the potentially diluted analog. If you really only need that little bit of water so that you aren't diluting anything out, because the test strip, the microgram per milliliter is a measure of density, excuse me, and so if you use too much water, right, then the density, it won't pick up the same density. It's nice that you only need a little bit of water for most of the things that folks are going to be testing here, because that can be difficult to find, clean enough water anyway. Thank you for that. Yeah, we don't need folks dumping residue or dumping a whole cup. So accurate as possible. Yes.
Okay.
Dana.
Could you also test marijuana resin?
Huh.
Good question.
That's interesting. I'm not sure.
It's a little bit.
Resin, I'm not sure if you could. I'm also not convinced of the utility. I know that people have seen a lot of, spice and fentanyl, K2, worries about K2 and fentanyl and that. I've heard some really mixed things about fentanyl and marijuana. Particularly, tell me more.
So, anytime there's an overdose or fatality in Washington County, I get the report from Narcotics Task Force, and then whatever agency, whatever law enforcement agency went on the call.
Mm-hmm.
So when I get Narcotics Task Force report, up in the corner, it would tell me the suspected drug.
Mm-hmm.
So and also on the report, it tells me if Narcan was administered and if it revived them.
Cool.
So I kept seeing, you were saying, cocaine, and I'm like, okay, it couldn't have been cocaine because Narcan wouldn't have revived them.
Yeah.
So what that was telling us is 9 times out of 10 it was fentanyl. So then I get another report when the actual test comes back. So I had K2 and I've been seeing an increase in marijuana.
So when it comes back, does it tell you cocaine, fentanyl? It tells you everything?
Yeah.
See, so that doesn't surprise me, and it's the same thing as, it's the same limitation as the cocaine data that we have, right? So that tells us that folks had fentanyl and marijuana in their systems, but doesn't tell us how it got there or if it got there together.
Yeah.
And a lot of people smoke weed, right? I know plenty of people who, I know plenty of people who don't even conceive of it as a drug, right? So it feels very possible that people are just sort of smoking a joint while they're doing whatever they're doing. And I've also heard that there's some, I wish I were a chemist sometimes, some complication with the burning, the point at which fentanyl burns, that if you tried to sprinkle fentanyl on marijuana flower, that you wouldn't be able to smoke it that way. Question mark. It's different when it's resin or spice is, we shouldn't call it synthetic marijuana because it's some whole jumble of God knows what. And that's a different story. It's spice and K2, right? It's interesting. I'm going to ask around. I'm going to ask around. That feels like a complicated testing resin. It doesn't dissolve very well either. What a mess.
Wouldn't that be like the sticky tar? The resin is sticky, so it wouldn't, yeah.
That feels complicated, right? You have to dilute something in water and it's oil-based.
But if it's on the shake.
Yeah. I'll ask around, especially in terms of how folks were testing their tar out west, because that should have a sort of parallel. It's something gooey. Something not easily dissolved like a powder. Question. What else?
Okay. Do you recommend SSPs/others distributing fentanyl test strips, stock empty capsules to give out to folks testing pills and who ingest them? Are there people doing this, and is there interest and demand for it?
Say it again? I caught it and then I got distracted by myself. Sorry.
Do you recommend that SSPs or others who are distributing test strips also stock empty capsules to give out to folks who are testing pills and who ingest them?
The empty capsule thing. I think that's a really neat idea. I actually don't know how much they go for these days, empty capsules. So if they're cheap and you want to have them around, why not? I mean, otherwise, I know it's a thing that exists in harm reduction programs globally, depending, and it's really a matter of talking to your community, right? Talk to your clients, ask them what they need, they're going to know. And you can give them suggestions. You never know when you can surprise someone with a new method of administration or anything like that. But if you ask, people will tell you if they're interested or not, if it works for their life or not. Real honest, real quick. See you later.
All we have for now. There is one question about, are these test strips available for users from health departments with free education? And I know there are a number of health departments in the room who will be distributing test strips. So I think that's the.
What's the question again?
Are these test strips available for users from the health departments with free education?
I guess it depends on the health department, right? Yeah. There's certainly some health departments in the room. Every to date existing syringe services program is also run out of health department. So yes, it's happening. And it depends. I think Dana will probably have the best insider information about which counties have applied and received test strips.
That's all the questions we have for now.
Lingering questions in the room before we look at some things? Okay, before we sign off online, if there are any lingering questions, please pop them in the chat box these next couple minutes. I left y'all a slide of resources. If there's something that you're looking for that's not on here that I can help find, please let me know. Certainly the access page that folks should be familiar with, right? Because that's how you applied for your test strips. Keep checking back. That is hosted by the Center for Harm Reduction Services at the Department of Health. There's a great, very recent CDC brief, evidence-based strategies for preventing opioid overdose, what's working in the United States. There's about 10 interventions in there that you can check out that have been very helpful, right? If you want to learn about fentanyl, Harm Reduction Coalition is a great place to go first for harm reduction-oriented information. The forecast study that we talked about with drug checking, there's a whole website about that. You can contact me if you're interested in training your TA. BTNX is the manufacturer of the strips that are most commonly used and that are also being distributed to y'all from the health department. They are over the moon, I think, that someone found this totally unknown use for their test strips and have a whole harm reduction page now. With all of the press and all of the things, right? And so they are embracing us. They're embracing us, but if you want to check out the specs of the test, things like temperature and those sorts of things, that should be up there. They have the analogs that everything tests for. And while fentanyl is a concern, there are other test strips. There are test strips for cocaine, right? So if that's important in your area, if folks want to know that their cocaine has any cocaine in it,
Right, yeah.
if it does, or if it's just gunpowder, right? We don't know. And so they have that. They have an opioid strip that picks up heroin, but not fentanyl. So there are options because these existed for urine, right? The Department of Health Overdose Response Program page. There's a great video series that DPA, the Drug Policy Alliance, a national organization, just released called Rethinking the Seller. One of my mentors and favorite people in our movement, you may have seen around the state, Louise Vincent, is featured. It complicates our narrative about what it means to sell drugs and be someone who sells drugs, right? Yes.
So the question is, what do you want people to think about how many strips to give at a time? There's been like discussion about what you think about that.
How many to give at a time? Emily. Be More Power packages 10 at a time?
They're currently doing 5 at a time.
5 at a time.
But if people want more than 5, they can get multiple.
And do you remember what,
I think the city is doing 5, and I think the city needle exchange. The Spark Center is doing either 5 or 10, I think.
Yeah. Okay. So like bundles of 5 or 10, it sounds like.
We were aiming to give them out in a quantity that matched the best practice recommendation that we were making. So we didn't want to say use these every time, but you can only have one. So we were trying to match our messages and let people choose how many they wanted.
Absolutely. So, ask the people that you're serving if what's working for them, if they're running out too fast, if they have to keep coming and getting more and that's inconvenient, or if they need just different access points, bundles of 5 or 10. And this is really the relationship building and the rapport stuff, right? Because you're going to use your own judgment. Your own judgment is going to be good, but we don't need to give 50 test strips to the curious, right? If someone who you know is injecting wants 50, by all means, Christine, this is certainly not guidance from anyone official, Christine, the harm reductionist, says give them as many as they want, the same as naloxone, right? And you also have to balance like your internal sort of responsibilities and service requirements. And lastly, I'll get to you in just a second. This is a really handy video, this bottom right corner one. It basically overviews this entire training and the directions in under 5 minutes. It's really cute. It's already been credited to whoever created it, Van Asher from New York. And it's one of those really cute ones where someone's illustrating and there's a narration. So it's a cartoon anyway. It's pretty fun. So yeah, if that's useful for you, it is free and available on YouTube. You can embed it in your site or do whatever you need to do. Show it at your place. Show it to your clients. And Jessica.
Yeah. Are they packaged individually, the strips?
Yes, they are.
Okay. I was thinking multiple came.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is there going to be a possibility where there could be a list of all the different providers of the naloxone? Just because I'm worried we're going to, like, our agency will probably run out of how many we're going to be giving. If we're going to be giving out 5% of the time, and we can say, once you use these, go to so-and-so.
Totally.
Yeah, we can definitely send out a list of everyone who received.
That would be really cool.
Cool. For everyone to hear, a definite yes. Emily.
Just a note from someone in the audience, we've also found we like to be able to, because you'll see the strips don't have instructions on them, so it's important, I think, to think through how you're going to make sure that people have instructions. There are lots of creative ideas out there, especially if somebody's passing on an individual packet. It's great if the instructions can match the number of packets.
I can show you an example of that later. Okay, if there are no other questions, let's wrap up the webinar. Thank you so much for joining, everybody who's online. Slides will go out and my contact information is there if anyone wants to follow up about anything or wants to, you know, set up a call, talk through what outreach, whatever makes sense for y'all. I am here to help. So thank you so much for spending your morning.